here we are. We've come to Wednesday of this Holy Week, and the week is flying by for us. I can only imagine for Jesus what it was like for him knowing that Friday is coming, and it's coming very quickly. As I said earlier, on Wednesday during the Holy Week, there's not a whole lot recorded. And so I just want to back up to Tuesday for the Olivet Discourse. The book of Matthew, as he's written it, it's broken into 5 sections. And in those 5 sections, you'll find pretty much broken into those 5 sections, you'll find the 5 discourses in Matthew. And the first one is probably the most recognizable to us, that we recall the most, is the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 through 7. And it's an important message, it's an important discourse for us as followers, because it really does lay out very clearly how we can live as followers of Jesus. But then there's the mission mandate in chapter 10 of Matthew, talking about a missionary lifestyle that disciples of Christ should live by. There's the parabolic discourse in chapter 13, and that talks about the kingdom, and Jesus does that through parables. He uses a lot of parables to talk about what the kingdom of God is like. Then there's the community-based disciples in chapter 18, talking about what a disciple looks like in the context of community, in church community, how we live together, how we interact together. And then finally in chapters 24 and 25 is the Olivet Discourse. And in this, it really talks a lot about end times. Jesus will talk about the destruction of the temple, and that would come up in AD 70 when Titus, the emperor of Rome, came in and demolished Herod's temple. And we see today that it's in that same condition. It is destroyed. The stones are knocked down. It no longer exists. We just have like the Wailing Wall, which remains. There's not a whole lot to that temple. Now we know in the future that the temple will once again be rebuilt, but in this time period, it's not. And so Jesus, he'll use a lot of language in this Olivet Discourse, in this teaching, in this sermon, in this message to his disciples. He'll use a lot of language that's really apocalyptic, talking about end times, things that are going to come. He's going to talk about signs of the times, things to watch out for, things that are very unusual happening in nature, happening in the culture, things that we could watch out for. And we look at these, and sometimes we start thinking, well, it looks like we're living in the end times, and we are living in the end times. But he'll also talk about something that maybe we get a little confused about, and that's his second coming. He talks about his second coming, and here will be some signs before his second coming. And sometimes we try to read, every generation does this, tries to read this as though, oh, all these signs are evident right now for us, and his coming is going to be in our lifetime. It could be at any moment, and that's true. It could be at any moment. But I think we have to read that a little cautiously, not trying to read the signs into our context necessarily. So he talks in that discourse about the end times, about his second coming, about things that are very apocalyptic. This is called the little apocalypse by some scholars, because it has such end time apocalyptic type of language in it. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is Judas Iscariot betraying Jesus. And this most likely happened on Wednesday, although it could have happened Tuesday, it could have happened early on Thursday, but it's likely that it happened on Wednesday. And this is Judas going to the Pharisees, the religious leaders, to make a deal with them about how he would betray Jesus. And Jesus, he makes it very clear that he's going to be betrayed. And then we see Judas Iscariot in chapter 26, Matthew 26, verse 14. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. And we see for 30 pieces of silver, Judas was willing to turn Jesus over. And we've got to remember, God is sovereign. God had this all planned. He knew that he wanted Jesus to pay. The Father wanted Jesus to pay for the sins of the world. And it needed to happen through this prescribed method. And so Judas fills that role of the betrayer. And it seems so sad to us over some money. But you know, if we're not careful, we can be a lot like Judas too. I've often heard it asked, how much is your integrity worth? How much is your name worth? A good name, how much is that worth to you? And sometimes we can be like Judas, and we can kind of sell our integrity or our good name or that Christian character in us. We can sell that for a business deal. We can sell that for something that seems so worthless. And Judas would recognize how worthless it was after Christ was executed, after he was crucified, and he would try to return that money, but that money just couldn't go away from him. His conscience was just so offended by what he had done. The money didn't even matter anymore. And I think it's a warning for us. Are we willing to somehow sacrifice our Christian character for money or for some moment of pleasure? And after that pleasure is gone, after we've spent the money, our conscience is still offended. I wish Judas would have come to the point that he would have recognized that Jesus can forgive and Jesus is enough. I wish afterward he would have, instead of allowing his better judgment to go commit suicide, instead of allowing that to happen, that he would have come to Jesus and asked for forgiveness. But we know in the story that didn't happen. So this is what's taking place on Wednesday. Judas is setting up some sort of scheme with the Pharisees, with the religious leaders, to turn Jesus over. Tomorrow we'll look at a very important day in the life and ministry of Jesus. He gives his disciples some last-minute type of instructions. He shows himself to be a servant and instructs us to be that too. So look forward to being with you again tomorrow.